Did you then really think that we created you in vain, and that he should be never brought back unto us again?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وعظيمنا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وأصحابه الغر الميامين. الحمد لله الذي جعلنا من المتمسكين بولاية سيدي ومولاي علي بن أبي طالب. اللهم صل على محمد. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. أما بعد، يقول الله في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل لا أسألكم عليه أجرا إلا المودة في القربى. The first of our loud salawat in honor of Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. The second in honor of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib. The third with your loudest voices in honor of the Imam of our time, Imam Sahib al-Asr wal-Zaman. There is a request for the brothers at the back to please come as close to the front as possible to make room for the brothers coming in. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Respected scholars, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. For the next 15 nights, we will be examining the biographies of the members of the household of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. An examination of the utmost importance, one which affects each and every one of our lives, and an examination with a historical basis and a contemporary significance. In Imami theological circles, the members of the household of the Holy Prophet are referred to as the 14 Infallibles. Namely, the Prophet himself, his daughter Fatima, his son-in-law Ali, then his grandsons Hassan and Hussein, and the 9 descendants from Hussein, namely Ali ibn al-Hussein, Muhammad ibn Ali, Ja'far ibn Muhammad, Musa ibn Ja'far, Ali ibn Musa, Muhammad ibn Ali, Ali ibn Muhammad, Al-Hasan ibn Ali, and the Messiah known as Al-Mahdi, Ajjalallah Farajahu al-Sharif. The principal aim of this examination is threefold. The first reason we're going to dissect the biographies of each member of the household of the Prophet is to apply their lessons into our life. Because when we dissect the lives of these personalities, we ask ourselves, what of their life over 1,000 years ago affects our life today in 2011? When I examine these great personalities, I ask myself which of their standpoint, which of their ethics, which of their principles can relate to my standpoints, my ethics, and my principles today. which situations did they face in their life which I may be facing in my life? As in, when we come to dissect the life of every one of these leaders, it shouldn't just be a theoretical discussion about when they were born, or how many children they had, or who they were married to. That part of knowledge is important. What it should really be is a practical discussion which examines the way their life affects our life. Which circumstances did they fall in, which we may fall in as well? And that's why, what do you find? You find that the first of the important points in dissecting the biographies of these 14 is that we want their lives to relate to us. Because many times people always say that when people discuss the biography of the 14, we don't relate history to our life today. We hear all these great stories, but we don't see a relationship with what we face today. The irony is, every one of those 14 at one point or another in their life faced a situation which we will face in our life. Either they had situations or circumstances with their family, or with their friends, or with their enemies, or with people of the same faith, or with people of different religions. We find that each of them faced circumstances, and we need to dissect how they reacted to those circumstances. At the end of the day, when we take them as role models in our life, it's not simply role models because they are from the line of the Prophet. There were many from the line of the Prophet. Rather, these members from the line of the Prophet were the one who in many Islamic traditions he narrates you should hold on to. Therefore, the first point as to why we're going to dissect their biographies is so that we take as many lessons from the anecdotes from their lives as is possible. As in, there's no point me just taking lessons in my life from Ali ibn Abi Talib only, or from Hussein only. Which lessons can I take from Musa ibn Ja'far? Which lessons can I take from Muhammad al-Jawad? Which lessons can I take from Hassan al-Askari? There is a tendency in our communities to focus on a couple of imams from the Infallibles and neglect many of them. This series of lectures on the first point will seek to dissect every imam every night and ask ourselves which lessons from their lives are applicable to us. That's the first point. The second point in examining the biography of the 14 Infallibles is that there are 4 key questions every human being will ask in their life, which these 14 have answered in their life. What are these 4 key questions? Which a Hindu will ask, a Sikh will ask, someone of the Jewish community will ask, someone of the Buddhist community will ask, someone of the Christian community will ask, someone of the atheist community will ask. There's 4 key questions which every human will ask. The first of them is a metaphysical question. The second is a cosmological question. The third is a psychological question, and the fourth is an ethical question. There is not a single human being who does not go through a moment in their life without asking these 4 questions. And there is not a single moment in the lives of those 14 where they have not answered each of them. What are the 4 questions? The metaphysical question: is there an unseen force who is the cause of the effect that we are today? Is there a God, or is it Mother Nature? That's a metaphysical question. It goes above the physical towards the unseen. Then there's a cosmological question. How did this universe begin? Many people ask that question. Then there is a what? A psychological question. What is my role in this world? Then there is an ethical question. How do I behave with other human beings, whether the human is from my religion or from another religion? Those 4 questions are the 4 most important questions in the psyche of any human. No human being will go through their life without asking these 4. The second reason we're going to diagnose and dissect and analyze the biography of the 14 infallibles is to look at what their answers were to these questions. What did Ali say about the metaphysical? What did Ja'far al-Sadiq say about the ethical? What did Ali ibn Musa say about the psychological? What did Hassan ibn Ali say about the cosmological? The second reason is that we want to see how their holistic approach to the world provides answers for mankind in the 21st century, be mankind a Muslim or not. The third reason we're going to dissect the life of the 14 infallibles in this series is because we as Muslims have committed injustice to these 14. How? We have cocooned them for ourselves and we don't share them with other religions. How many of us have explained Ali ibn Musa al-Rada's golden medical dissertation to the Sikh community? How many of us have discussed the maxims of Ali ibn Abi Talib with a Buddhist? How many of us have dissected the bravery of Hussein outside of Karbala and then discussed it with a member of the Jewish community? You notice these 14 were not meant for Muslims. Rather, they were the property of every human being. We made them the property of Islam only, and we committed an injustice. As in, how many of us can sincerely say that we've discussed our imams with our non-Muslim brethren? Some will say, okay, I discussed Imam al-Hussein one day with one of my non-Muslim friends. I asked him, how about Ja'far al-Sadiq? Did you discuss him? Or did you discuss Muhammad al-Jawad's knowledge with your non-Muslim friends? When these 14 were chosen as guidance, they were chosen as guidance for mankind, not for Islam. Islam came as a religion to allow for the evolution of the growth of mankind. The role of the 14 was what? Their role was to allow for the growth and the evolution of the human being, but any human being, not just the Muslim being. Notice Gandhi. Does anyone ever say Gandhi the Hindu, or do they say Gandhi the humanitarian? When they look at Luther King, do they say Luther King the Christian or Luther King the humanitarian? What we need to do at the end of this series is take the Imams of Al-Muhammad and the leaders, the infallibles, out of the cocoon of Islam and allow the whole world to learn from their lives, from their principles and from their ethics. Generosity, is it an Islamic principle or a human principle? Patience, is it an Islamic principle or a human principle? Forbearance, is it an Islamic principle or a human principle? All of the traits from these Imams are human principles. Any human being can relate to a patient human being. You don't need to belong to Islam to say patience is a virtue. The third reason we'll dissect their biographies is to allow them to be seen as human role models. That's why tonight, as an introductory lecture, tonight I'd like to focus on one area before I begin tomorrow with the Holy Prophet's biography. Tonight, the first questions I want to ask are questions regarding my methodology in reconstructing Islamic history. And I'd like to ask a number of key questions. Number one, can we reconstruct Islamic history, or is history his story? Number two, how important is intertextuality for us to have a rounded picture of these 14's lives? Number three, what are the sources we're going to use to discuss the lives of the 14? And why is it important that we use our sources and sources from other schools in Islam? Number four, these 14, or indeed these 12, was it a made up notion after the 12th Imam went into Ghaibah? Or is there evidence before the 12th Imam of discussions concerning them? And number five, why is it important for the biblical religions like Judaism and Christianity to discuss the lives of the infallibles? Because of the chapter of Genesis in the Bible. Let's discuss this and dissect it with an introduction to the biographies. The first question that arises in the discussion of the biographies of the Infallibles is, can we really reconstruct Islamic history reliably? What do I mean? There are certain people who oppose this reconstruction of Islamic history. Why? They say that we have two problems with reconstructing early history, as in when I'm going to be discussing the Prophet's life and discussing the life of the Imams, I'm going to be discussing the first 300 years of Islamic history, isn't it? From the time of the Prophet until the time of the 12th Imam, it's the first 300 years of Islamic history. There is a school known as the skeptic school, who say that Islamic history cannot be reconstructed reliably. And they say there are two reasons we cannot reconstruct our history. The first reason, which is a very interesting reason, is that they say all the books which I'm going to use as references for the dissection of the lives of the Infallibles were books which were written after the year 300. So they turn around and they say, how could you rely on books which are so late to discuss people who were so early? What do they mean? They say early Islamic history was oral, it wasn't written. In the time of the Prophet, they say everybody used to narrate the history after the Prophet died orally. I heard Rasulullah say, I saw Rasulullah do. It was all oral. They say it was late in Islam that you wrote down your history. So the first objection they have in reconstructing Islamic history is, your written material on early history is very late. How can you be so sure that your written material discusses something 300 years before? How can you be so sure that it's reliable? Their second objection is what? History is nothing but his story. Break the word history, what do you get? His story. Their second objection is, those sources you're going to use, how do you know the author isn't writing history in a way which looks after his theology or his political opinion? It's a very interesting point. When I'm an author of a book of history, am I going to write objectively, or am I going to write in a way where I look after my people? That's why they say, you Muslims trying to reconstruct your history, the second objection they had was, history is his story. He looks back, he looks at who he likes, so he makes him look great, he makes him say great words, he makes him sound like he was brave, and he looks at who he dislikes and he makes him sound bad and weak and negative and so on. These two objections, we cannot begin with the biography of the Infallibles unless we answer these two objections. Isn't that true? Because they are very valid objections. The first one, they say, your book, for example, like Tabari, is a book of history, isn't it? They say Tabari is a book written 400 years after Muhammad died. Or they say, for example, your book like the book of Al-Baladhari and Sab al-Ashraf, that's written 300 years after Muhammad dies. Or they say Al-Kamil fi al-Tarikh Ibn al-Athir, that's written a few hundred years after Muhammad died. Or they say your books like Al-Kafi, 300 years after Muhammad died. Or Man La Yahdaru al-Faqih. They begin to name you all these books, and when you actually look at when they're written, you're like, hold on a minute, how comes all the books we use are written so late? If I'm going to use books which are written 300 years after Jamal, Siffin and Karbala, how do I know these books are actually telling the truth? Because there's such a big gap, isn't there? Say for example, Karbala was in the 61st year after Hijrah, and a book like Tabari is writing, let's say 250 years after Karbala. How do I know that he's reconstructing it exactly the way it should be? Because they're saying all your material was oral, people would hear each other, but no one was writing until late. How do we reply to both these objections? I need you to understand the reply to both. Because the moment you can reply to both, you can reconstruct Islamic history. The first reply to the group who say your books are late, we reply, number one, does a solid core of history exist from these books even though they're late? There is a concept called the solid core, What does the solid core mean? Fred Donner and Montgomery Watts said, even though you may have many books which are late, a solid core exists which allows you to paint a picture of early history. Saqifa, is it narrated in all the books? Yes. There's a solid core about Saqifa. Jamal, is it narrated? There's a solid core. Safin, do all of them talk about Safin? Yes. Nahrawan, do they talk about Nahrawan? Yes. Karbala, do they say Karbala happened? Yes. I'm not going to talk about what motivated the author. I'm focusing that do I have a solid core to work with? Because when I want to dissect the Imam number 1 until Imam number 12, I need to make sure that the solid core that I have, whether it's my school or another school in Islam, the solid core exists. Jamal happened, Safin, Nahrawan, Karbala, Mukhtar, Abdullah ibn Zubair, Abbasids, Umayyads, Harun Rashid, Ma'mun. That solid core number 1 clearly exists. Then number 2, even if you write a book later, what's there to stop you finding a chain which goes back all the way to Rasulullah? Isn't there? If I write a book 300 years after Rasulullah, I meet someone who is older than me. I say to him, excuse me, did you ever hear anything about Rasulullah? He says, yes, I heard him say, and he heard from him, and he heard from him, and he heard from Rasulullah, isn't it? What is that called? It's an isnad, it's a chain. When they came and said your books are late, we replied by saying, hold on, but our authors show us the chain. And the chain goes all the way back to early works. Abdul Razak San'ani has a book called Al-Musannaf. It's one of the earliest books of fiqh. As-San'ani, what does he do? When he takes a hadith on fiqh, he gives you the chain. Do you know why? Because he knew there'd be a day in 2011 when someone says, your book of fiqh is late. How do you know Muhammad actually gave that theory of fiqh? San'ani, what did he do? He said, okay, let me tell you how I got this hadith. I got it from Ibn Juraj, who got it from Ata, who got it from Umar ibn al-Khattab, who got it from Rasulullah. What is he given? He's given me a chain. Or in another hadith he says, this is from Ibn Ishaq, who got it from Az-Zuhri, who got it from Ibn Zubair, who got it from Zubair, from Rasulullah. Just because a book is written late does not mean you don't have a chain that goes back all that way. That's number 2. Number 3, even if my early history was oral, just because there is a lot of oral transmission, does that mean there was no one writing at home? When you tell me early Islamic history was mainly oral, I reply by saying, okay, most people were narrating orally. Does that mean no one was writing anything at home? On the contrary, even you find there is an article by Eaton Kohlberg, the famous academic, who says that our 5th Imam was referring to a book called Kitab Ali. Imam al-Baqir, when he was discussing a hadith, was referring to a book called Kitab Ali. That means Ali ibn Abi Talib, even though most of his words were transmitted orally, was also writing a work at home. There was already a work which was being produced. And that's why even Abdullah ibn Zubair, who was alive, how many years after Rasulullah did he live for? He lived for 55, 60 years after Rasulullah. Abdullah ibn Zubair, when you read many of his works, he will always say, which transcript or which sahifa did you get that particular narration? Even further than this, which we can go a step, when they tell me all your books of history are late, I reply to them, what is early to you? This is a vital line. What is early? When you tell me my books are late, give me a date that is early, I'll give you a source. They themselves, the term early is vague for them. They played psychologically by telling us your books are late. I reply by saying to them, what is early? Give me a date. If I give you a book from that date, will you admit I can reconstruct Islamic history clearly? Therefore, the first group, we replied back to them. But the second group were more interesting. The second group said history is his story. How do you know that that writer who you trust, of course he's going to write books praising Ali and hating Muawiyah, because he's from your school. So when he writes history, he's writing his story. He's not going to write history the way it should be written. And they gave two brilliant examples. There is two scholars who are famous historians and theologians. One is called Abu Bakr al-Baqillani, and the other is called Ahmad ibn Yahya al-Baladhri. They say that you attack Muawiyah because you say that the books of history say Muawiyah is not a good person. But the people you get your hadiths from, how many times on the minbar have you heard someone saying, it's in Bukhari, it's in Bukhari? Many times you've heard speakers who say, it's in Bukhari. Bukhari says this person is bad. Bukhari was working for the Abbasid government. Do you think an Abbasid is going to write history writing good about Bani Umayyah? It's a point. When you're saying Bukhari has a hadith where he's against Muawiyah, for example, or Yazid. Yes, but Bukhari was working with the Abbasid government. Naturally, his political affiliation may affect the way he writes history. Al-Baqillani was an Ash'arite in his theology. Therefore, when he writes history, isn't he going to write history with an Ash'arite vision? Ahmad ibn Yahya al-Baladhri was the chief judge of Al-Mutawakkil. If he's the chief judge of Al-Mutawakkil and he's an Abbasid, of course he's going to hate Bani Umayyah, because Bani Umayyah, Banu Abbas took over from them. The second school of skeptics, what did they say? They say, you Muslims can't reconstruct your history because your authors write history with the lens of their theology or their politics. They don't write it objectively. How do we reply back to them? We reply back by saying, Al-Baqillani, for example, or Al-Baladhri is an Abbasid. If Al-Baladhri is writing history with the lens of the school that he follows, that means he can't praise any Bani Umayyah, because if he's a Bani Abbasid employee, he's not going to praise anyone from Bani Umayyah. Whereas Al-Baladhri has many narrations where he praises people who are Khulafa of Bani Umayyah. If Al-Baladhri was biased in his history and he wasn't objective, he shouldn't praise Bani Umayyah. He should say, I work for Banu Abbas. Banu Abbas hate Bani Umayyah, I hate all of Bani Umayyah. No. Read the work of someone like Al-Baladhri and you will find very clearly that he praises, for example, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. You know, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz is the one who stopped the la'na on Imam Ali in the Friday prayer. And Umar ibn Abdul Aziz is the one who gave Fadak back to the sons of Bibi Fatima. Yes? Umar ibn Abdul Aziz is an Umayyad Khalifa. If Muslim historians are writing their story, then Al-Baladhri shouldn't praise Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, because Umar ibn Abdul Aziz is Bani Umayyah, Baladhri is with Bani Abbas. No. We have many great historians in Islamic history who are objective. When they need to praise their own, they will praise. But when they need to praise the opposition, they will praise as well. Number two, in reply to these people, what makes you think there was a crystallized ideology in many of these people's minds at the time? You know why they say this? They say some of these scholars, they already were crystallized in their opinion. That's why they are not objective in their history. Who told you they were crystallized in their opinion? Many of them still were trying to understand how Islam developed. There wasn't such a thing as a prototype, for example, follower of Ahlus Sunnah. There was someone who in his theology was following Ash'ari and in his fiqh was following Abu Hanifa. Can you call that someone who is crystallized? No. In his theology he follows one scholar and his fiqh he follows someone else. In other words, what are we saying? We're saying when someone replies by saying history is his story, we reply yes. There may be moments where a person's opinions affect the way they write their history, but many of our historians are objective. But that leads me on to a theory. If we are going to only use historical sources to discuss the biography of the 14 Infallibles, we're going to find ourselves in a debate which is what? Cyclical. They'll keep coming back to us and they'll keep saying, but it's a book of history and you can't rely on history and history is only writing his story. So do you know what theory we're going to use in the next 15 nights? We're going to use the theory of intertextuality. Why should I discuss the biography of the Imams only from history? Why don't I use different genres of Islamic literature? Kristeva was the person who began the theory of intertextuality. Do you know what she said? She said, when you want to discuss a particular figure in history or a particular nation, don't discuss them from one genre of literature. Use different genres of literature and discuss them, because you will allow yourself to see different codes of knowledge coming out from different areas of literature. What do I mean? I mean, why should we focus on history? Why don't we also use books of jurisprudence, known as books of fiqh? And why don't we use books of theology, known as books of kalam? And why don't we use books of bell letters, known as books of adab? When I want to dissect Ja'far as-Sadiq, I don't need to just look at history. If I look at history books for Ja'far as-Sadiq, someone will come to me and say, but that historian is good with Ja'far as-Sadiq. So I say, okay, I won't just use books of history. I'm going to look at Ja'far as-Sadiq and all of the books of history, and the books of fiqh on Ja'far as-Sadiq, and the books of theology on Ja'far as-Sadiq, and the books of adab, Arabic literature on Ja'far as-Sadiq. Tell me, won't that give me a more whole picture of Ja'far as-Sadiq? Too many people, when they dissect the Imams, what do? They use only books of history. And then someone comes and says, well, how's this book reliable? Okay, what we're going to use is different genres of literature. Someone's going to turn around and say, why different genres of literature? History will give me a narrative. Fiqh will show me how much they contributed to this religion's legal system. If I take a book of early jurisprudence, I will show how Muhammad al-Baqir is in a different league to anyone around him. If I only took a book of history, I will only look at Muhammad al-Baqir in terms of family, wife, children, wars. If I use a book of fiqh, I can show you Muhammad al-Baqir's legal knowledge of Salah and Sawm and Zakat and Hajj and Khums and so on. But I'm not going to stop there. Let me look at Muhammad al-Baqir also from theology. Let's look at his sermons on predestination and free will. Let's look at his sermons on the importance of God's mercy to mankind. Let's look at his sermons on theological issue about sin and the different types of sin. Now look, I have Muhammad al-Baqir from history. I have Muhammad al-Baqir from fiqh. I have Muhammad al-Baqir from theology. I don't stop there. I'm also going to look at Muhammad al-Baqir from Arabic literature. Let's look at the eloquence of Amir al-Mu'mineen from Arabic literature as well. The khutbah of Imam Ali, where he doesn't use the letter alif once. Or the khutbah of Imam Ali, where he was asked, can you give a whole khutbah without using a letter of the Arabic alphabet which has a dot? He gave a whole khutbah without any of the letters with dots. If I use a book of history, Ali ibn Abi Talib will be narrow to a historical figure. Let me show Ali from history, Ali from fiqh, Ali from theology, Ali from Arabic literature. Now you will see why they are on a different level to those who surrounded them. So someone asks, so what are the sources you're going to use? These are the sources I'm going to use over the next 15 nights. I'm mentioning them so that you may go and do further reading on these sources and allow for a more grand picture of these 14 infallibles. From history, I'm going to use the works of Baladhari, Tabari, Ibn al-Athir, Yaqubi, Mas'udi. These are going to be my historians. In theology, I'm going to use the works of Shaykh al-Mufid, Sharif al-Murtada, al-Tawhidi, Qadi Abd al-Jabbar, Qadi Nu'man. These are the people for me for theology. In fiqh, I'm going to use the works Al-Fiqh Al-Akbar of Abu Hanifa, Kitab Al-Umm of Imam Al-Shafi'i, Malik's Muwatta, the work of later jurisprudence like Jassas, for example, and even taking snippets from the works of Bukhari and Muslim and Nasa'i and so on. In Arabic literature, we're going to use Jahid and we're going to use Tawhidi. Now we look, we've got 4 genres of literature to examine 14 human beings. 4 genres of literature. Are these the only sources I'm going to use? No, I'm going to add you more sources. We're going to use, for example, Abu al-Faraj al-Asfahani's, for example, we're going to use Maqatil al-Talibiyin, Kitab al-Aghani is going to be used as well. We're going to use the works of later historians and academic specialists like Aqad, Tustari, Lawasani, Amin. Even, for example, the works of someone like Ibn Amda and Ibn Anba, you will use all of these works. And what are we going to do? Not just focus on historical works, use the theory of intertextuality. Let's see how these texts, when they mix with each other, provide you with the holistic figure that is a member of the household of the Prophet. But then a question arises from the beginning. The question is an interesting one. Name me a hadith. You want to discuss these 14 or you want to discuss these 12? Someone comes and says, name me or give me the reference of one narration which mentions the Prophet talking about these 12, but before your Mahdi went to occultation. Why? Because there's a theory which is being spread now that the idea of the infallibles is an idea which was concocted after the Mahdi. Now they have a point in which area? They have a point that it's not easy to find a narration where the Prophet says, these are the 12 Imams after me by name. Someone will say, Sayyid Ammar, it's in Al-Kafi. Yes, but Al-Kafi is written after the Ghaibah. Someone says it's in Man La Yahdaruhu Al-Faqih. It's after the Ghaibah. Someone says, for example, Wasa'il Al-Shia, after the Ghaibah. Bihar Al-Anwar, after the Ghaibah. Yanabi' Al-Mawadda, after the Ghaibah. The theory is therefore that they say that your idea of 12 Imams after the Prophet, you want to discuss them, you don't even have an early narration about the Prophet mentioning them. All your narrations about them somehow come to us after they've all died. Why shouldn't we suspect that someone came later and formed a theory where he picked out 12 and he said that the Prophet said follow these 12? And I tell you, you can go to many scholars, and if you want to do it, play devil's advocate. Go to many scholars and say, Maulana, can you show me a hadith where the Prophet says, these are the 12 after me, and these are their names? But show me a hadith in a book which wasn't written after the Ghaibah, in a book which was written during their lives. The moment you can answer this question, then you can move on with the discussion. And I tell you, it's not an easy question to answer. Because there are many who come and tell you, discuss the Ma'sumeen, follow the Ma'sumeen. Tell him, excuse me, where is the hadith about these Ma'sumeen? Because I see the hadith is very late. He'll say, yes, there is a chain which goes back, which we can give as an argument, no doubt. But give a more simple argument to this area. What is the more simple argument? We do have references which we can build to highlight why we need to discuss these 14 or these 12. First, in the book of Al-Bukhari. Al-Bukhari lived in what time? From 196 Hijrah until the middle of the 3rd century. Al-Bukhari is the famous Sahih. In that Sahih Al-Bukhari, he mentions very clear that Rasulullah says, after me there will be 12 caliphs, all of them are from Quraysh. Already there you have the number 12, isn't it? That's the first point. Bukhari wrote Sahih Al-Bukhari after Imam Zamana or before? Before. Bukhari wrote his book from, you're looking at, let's say, the time of the beginning of the 3rd century, before Imam Zaman. Then number 2, you have Imam, 6th Imam, had 400 usul. His disciples would write his hadiths. From these 400 usul, only 16 remain. There's an article on these usul by Eaton Kohlberg, professor of Islamic studies at Tel Aviv University. Which university? Tel Aviv. Eaton Kohlberg has an article where he talks about the usul of Ja'far as-Sadiq, which of them remain. Many of these usul, many of these hadiths were burnt out or removed. Only 16 remain, and they're in Iran. They've remained. The manuscript has remained. Of these 16, there is one which is a vital one, which is protected today. The manuscript called Al-Asl, the Asl of Abu Sa'id Al-Asfari. This hadith is of a man called Abu Sa'id, lived in the time of Imam al-Sadiq. The manuscript is with us until today. It's been protected. Abu Sa'id says that the Prophet said, there are 12 successors after me, and he named them from Imam until Imam. Number 2. Number 3, the great companion of Ahlul Bayt, Fadl ibn Shadan, has a book called Kitab al-Ghaybah. Fadl ibn Shadan was a companion, according to some, of the 8th, 9th, 10th and 11th Imam. And he's the one who has the hadith about the 12th Imam. Fadl ibn Shadan has a hadith where the Prophet mentions the names of each of the 12. Fadl ibn Shadan came after Imam Zamana or before? Before. If he came after them, people will say, you made up this theory. When you had 12 names, you made them up. No. In the time, then we have a Zaydi leader. You know our Zaydi brothers in Yemen. One of their great leaders, Al-Rassi, was living in the time of our 10th Imam. He has a book called Ar-Rad al-Rafida, a reply to the rejectors. Because you know they call the Imamis rejectors. In the book Ar-Rad al-Rafida, he talks about our 10th Imam. What does he say? He says, and the 10th Imam of the Rafida. Ar-Rassi is living in the time of the 10th Imam. He doesn't say Ali al-Hadi. He says no, the 10th Imam of the Rafida, proving that the idea of Imams was not an idea made after Imam Zaman, was an idea which was already in the time. It's not an easy concept to understand. It may even be a concept which you need to go over again after this. But understand that these documents are vital to show in the time of the Imams there was already a discussion about the 12th. And that's why, as a conclusion, is it only us as Muslims who need to dissect, like we're going to from tomorrow, begin the biography of the Prophet, then Imam Ali, then Imam every night? Is it only us? No. Genesis in the Bible has a fundamental verse which highlights that God has always promised the human being that his message would continue in a certain line. Genesis chapter 17, verse 18 to 20. When Sarah cannot give birth to Abraham, she does what? She says, marry my maidservant Hajar. Hajar gives birth to who? Ismail. In the Bible in Genesis, it discusses the story. When she gives birth to Ismail, in the Bible, in Genesis, it says that she gave birth to the baby and a spring of water gushed. After that it says, God says to Abraham, I will bless the generations of Ismail and make them blessed and make them fruitful and make them a large nation and allow them to have 12 princes from his line. In other words, when we're going to dissect this series on the biography of the Ma'sumin or the biography of the Infallibles, understand the dissection is not just an Islamic or an Imami dissection. It's a dissection which is the responsibility of every one of you to spread to your non-Muslim brethren that God did promise that there will be 12 princes with a large nation from the line of Nabi Ismail. Inshallah, tomorrow we will begin with the biography of the Holy Prophet. Let's pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to raise us with Muhammad and Al Muhammad and allow us to be amongst the companions of Imam Sahib al-Asr wal-Zaman. Raise us with the Imam of our time and allow us to receive his intercession in this world and the hereafter. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the Surah Al-Fatiha, but before it the loudest of your salawat.